Hello. Hi, my name is Matthew von Unworth. I'm the director of the Brill Library here, and on behalf of the Friends of the Library, it is my great pleasure to be able to introduce Arlene Heyman tonight. She is a great friend of the Institute and especially the library. She's been an advocate, supporter, sister in arms, secret sharer, and always friend. As lovers of books and lovers of psychoanalysis, we've often found ourselves between the same rock and hard place, and she's always good company there. I knew Arlene's passion and originality long before I knew her writing, and it's such a thrill for me to read that voice, enriched, transposed, sublimated into the polyphonic chorus she sings through in her stories. Even more, it's so exciting to watch her use the gifts of her first field, the careful observation of others, minute reflection upon the self, and above all the use of one's own emotions, what analysts call affects, both to enter and create the mind of another. Creative writers often employ these human capacities, but they are not rigorously trained to use them as analysts are, just as analysts are not always taught to enrich these observations through written expression. Arlene's work draws these powerful abilities together, and it was worth the wait. If you're interested in who it is that writes this way, in what used to be called the vital statistics, Arlene would tell you she's a 74-year-old psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. She sees patients in analysis and psychotherapy. She went to Bennington College in Vermont. She wrote stories under the tutelage of great writer Bernard Malamud. He and she were close friends, what I think today are called friends with benefits. She got a master's degree at Syracuse University. Then she went to medical school and became a psychiatrist, and then studied psychoanalysis right here at the New York Psychoanalytic Institute. If you're interested in why she writes, in another piece she's written, she'll tell you that she learned to write from her aunts during the war, who wrote to their husbands to bring them back, and they did come back. And then she'll tell you she writes like the lady Murasaki Shikibu, author of Tales of Genji, who said she wrote the first novel to preserve what she cannot bear to see pass away. And if you're interested in what she writes, then you're in for a treat, for I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Arlene Heyman, who will now read from her wonderful book, Scary Old Sex. At the end, she'll take questions.
That was lovely, Matthew. That was lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I should address you as colleagues, friends, members of the New York Psychoanalytic Institute, and Matthew von Unworth, gracious librarian and analyst scholar. I'm going to spend most of my time tonight reading from Scary Old Sex, so you get a feel for the book. And the rest of the time, I want to hear your comments and questions. I'm going to start with some brief remarks on being both a psychoanalyst and a writer. I've been a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst. Can you hear me in the back? I want to make sure. Yes. I've been a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst for more than 35 years. I've been writing fiction all my life. Actually, when Matthew spoke about my learning to write from an aunt who was writing letters to her husband in Europe and her brother in Europe, I was 2 or 3 at that time. So my writing was just these scrawls, because I could see her writing every day to them, so I was scrawling, and she would take that piece of paper, this thin blue paper you used to have then, and put it in the envelope and send it to my uncle. So that was the beginning of my writing career. Okay, so I've been writing fiction all my life. People inevitably say to me, being a psychoanalyst and a fiction writer, those must work well together. You get all that material in the office. And a reviewer of Scary Old Sex asks, Quote, are Heyman's stories based on the lives of her patients, her own life, a product of her imagination? The reader may well wonder. The fact is, and this is only a partial answer to the reviewer's question, I believe and I hope that I have a lead shield up between my patients' lives and my fiction. My patients trust me with secrets, with thoughts of which they feel ashamed, in the hope of getting help, not ending up in a story. To write about a patient in a professional paper in order to advance knowledge in the field, even that is a delicate enterprise, which psychoanalysts are uneasy about. We disguise the material and often show the paper to the patient for permission. But to use a patient in one's fiction, it would be, I imagine, like molesting a young person you've been asked to babysit. Also, fortunately, it happens that creating fictional characters and understanding patients are two very different enterprises. A writer may start with anything, herself, or someone she knows, or someone she's read about, or even a trait when creating a character. And then she might merge some of this person with some of that. She imagines up scenes in which the character shows himself. She coats the original bit of sand with layers and layers of mother of pearl in the hope of creating an iridescent gem. With a patient, the analyst is faced with a complex, already created world, which, while she needs to appreciate it in all its plenitude, she also needs to simplify in order to be of use to the patient. The patient presents so many aspects of his life that it becomes confusing, or he conceals crucial facts, presents little of his life, or in monotone he presents the same thing again and again with seeming disregard for his listener. Each human being is, of course, different. And the analyst therapist tries to feel what the patient feels and also what the patient is not able to let himself feel. And the analyst tries to be aware, well, she really can't help but be aware of what she is feeling herself as she listens. And she tries to catch the little silver fish that suddenly rise to the surface from her own life. This process is absorbing and demanding and sometimes painful because the analyst feels it through her own childhood and adolescence and adult life, her own traumas and mistakes, along with what she has learned in her training, what she has learned from other patients, what she knows of the world, and she is reading, reading, reading. She needs to distill all of this for herself and then for the patient in order to let him see the historical reasons he had to hold that arm in this distorted position, to use a metaphor, and bend that knee so painfully, and he has, in quotes, walked like that all his life. And there's a beautiful line from W.H. Auden, "You shall love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart." But now the circumstances and people around the patient are very different, and he doesn't need to walk in the way he developed when he was 3 or 13 or 18 in order to stay attached to the most important people in his life, to stay alive. The analyst has to convey much. The patient may have to put himself in traction. Together, they may have to break bones and reset them. It's hard, long, painful work indeed. Of the analytic pair, the patient has the dirtier, bloodier job. To say everything that comes to mind means that at some point you will be throwing shit at your analyst, drawing blood. However, the analyst must bear and often help the patient see his aggression. And usually the analyst will have experienced in childhood or adolescence or adulthood some version, at least some wisp of the patient's pain and aggression. And it is usually more than a wisp. There is an oscillating process in treatment. The patient tells a story or asks a question, and the analyst may be jarred or may feel overwhelmed. She waits her feelings out, Associations come to her from her own life, her relations with those she had to find ways to be connected with in order to stay alive. Sometimes she catches on right away. Often she needs patience with herself to be able to rest in the conviction that if she sits still and listens, understanding will come to her. If she realizes that something is radically wrong, the patient is getting nowhere over time, she is in over her head, she takes the case to her study group, or she calls a respected colleague and pays for a consultation. Often this will begin a process of self-analysis in the analyst so that she sees herself better and the patient better. Language is very important, of course, in literature, but it is also important in psychoanalysis. The analyst rarely speaks beautifully. The patient rarely speaks beautifully, although occasionally each does speak beautifully. But the analyst pays close attention to the patient's choice of words. Slips of the tongue matter. First drafts are crucial. For many writers, writing is also a painful activity, especially first drafts. The writer, like the patient, is trying to wrest something out of her innards. She doesn't know if it can be made into something clean and beautiful and powerful and good. The right language detoxifies for oneself and one's reader what one is writing about. It raises the subject matter out of the garbage, infuses it with love and beauty. And here's a quote from Paul Thoreau, for which I'm indebted to Ted Jacobs, who has a wonderful essay, Insights, Epiphanies, and Working Through, from a book I would recommend to you highly, The Possible Profession. The Possible Profession. And the quote from Paul Thoreau goes as follows. As a person, I am hurt and incomplete. My stories are the best of me. I inhabit every sentence I write. I tear them out of my heart. People have said, you are your stories. I protested, no, no, my stories are better than me. End quote. For me, these are different, deep pleasures, to be an analyst, to be a writer engaged in a second or third draft. It's no pleasure in a first draft. For the analyst, at least this analyst, there is a sense of redemption, that through feeling another's pain and rage, she reconnects with her own pain and rage and helps him bear them better, change his life so he is less destructive and self-destructive. And there is also a sense of accomplishment, of delight, and of union. I did that. We did that together. And I guess I'm thinking now of the reviewer's question. This is how you end a paper. You go back to the beginning. So here I am. I'm thinking again of that reviewer's question. Where do stories come from? In the end, they come from, and this is Yeats' image, they come from the foul rag and bone shop of the heart, of one's own heart, which connects somehow with the heart of the world, so that for a moment, the writer is beautiful and courageous, and it is a brave new world. Okay, now I'm going to read a little bit from Scary Old Sex. So this is the beginning of the first story, called The Loves of Her Life. Would you like to make love? Stu called out to Marianne as she entered their apartment. She walked toward his office. It was mid-Saturday afternoon, and Stu was still in his purple pajamas at the computer, a mug of coffee on the cluttered desk. He had a little wet, mocha-colored stain under his lip on his beard, and his wiry gray hair stood up thinly around his large bald spot. He looked at her shyly for a moment, then looked back at the computer screen. His office was a small room off the entrance foyer the glossy hardwood floor littered with unruly piles of papers and journals. She spotted Dissent, MIT Technology Review, the Hightower Lowdown. Unframed photos of children and grandchildren lay scattered on the marble radiator cover. Marianne had just come back from a frenetic brunch with her son Billy at a bistro on Madison Avenue and hadn't yet taken off her coat. Because his wife was divorcing him, Billy was distraught. From her point of view, as an ex-social worker, Marianne had always considered her son's wife a borderline personality. From the human point of view, an outright bitch. And Marianne would have rejoiced that they were divorcing, except that Billy was distraught. She had tried to comfort him at the same time that she was urging him not to give in to his wife's outrageous demands. Lyria wanted the apartment and the country house and half of Billy's business. Only half? Marianne had asked, but Billy was deaf to her sarcasm. He put away one gray goose after another, while the poached eggs he'd ordered turned into hard yellow eyes, and he kept making throat-clearing, half-gagging sounds he'd made occasionally when he got anxious as a kid. She didn't think she'd heard those sounds in 25 years. She had joined him in a gray goose herself, trying to smooth away her edginess, and since she rarely drank, she was still tipsy. Marianne wanted either to go to the gym to work it off or try for a drop-in appointment at her hairdresser's, where she would be cosseted. She could use some cosseting. But she knew how hard it was for her husband to ask for sex, even after 3 wives. Marianne was his 4th. Why was it so hard? The best Stu had come up with was fear of rejection. She didn't understand. If you were out one day, you might be in the next. But he was reluctant even to ask for all dark meat from the chirping chicken takeout place. And also, he tended to buy the first item a salesperson showed him. His timidity annoyed her. He thought he was just an easygoing, nice guy, cooperative, and many agreed with him. She had other resentments, some small. He never brought her flowers, although she adored flowers. Quote, "I buy you printer cartridges," he'd said, "and flash drives." Some resentments were chasm-sized. He didn't make enough money, and what he made, he was always giving to obscure political groups working for social justice, or to one of his numerous importuning adult children, the major beneficiaries of his modest will. And he dressed badly and called her superficial when she complained, though lately he had let her go clothes shopping with him. Clothes delighted her. A tall, slender woman with prominent cheekbones, slanted blue eyes, and dramatic silver-white hair. Marianne attracted admiration. She did a little modeling for Eileen Fisher, one of the few fashion designers whose ads occasionally featured older women. She was proud of being, hands down, the best-looking of his wives. He loved her, she knew, in part for her looks, and so it wasn't fair that he criticized her for caring how he looked. And couldn't he be even a little seductive instead of asking for sex as if he were asking for a game of tennis? In spite of it all, or perhaps because of it, she tried never to reject him when he asked. It softened her up toward him making love, and it got him away from his computer and connected him to another human being, namely her. She tried to do it at least once a week. It didn't sound like much. She had made love 3 or 4 times a week with her first husband, who'd been younger than she and who had died 11 years ago. But now that she was 65 and Stu 70, spontaneity was difficult. She had acid reflux and so had to stay upright for 2 or 3 hours after a meal, or else suffer burning pains in her chest. And she had to insert Vagifem, low-level estrogen tablets, in her vagina twice a week so her tissues didn't thin out. He used Viagra half an hour before sex, and because he tended to come too soon if they weren't making love often, and once a week wasn't often, He also took a dose of clomipramine, an antidepressant that had, as a side effect, retarded ejaculation. The Viagra made him feel flushed for the rest of the day, and the clomipramine made him spacey. So they usually had sex toward evening, if not at night. He didn't really come too soon. He never came until after she climaxed, but she got most of her pleasure from intercourse after she had come. An oddity, perhaps, but that was how she was. She hated remembering what sex had been like for her in her 20s, before she'd accepted herself, and when the received wisdom was that you weren't a real woman unless you came vaginally, that is, no hands. The huffing and puffing and the squeals and screams of orgasmic pleasure she had faked. And this was in the dawning age of feminism. She had heard from a neighbor, a high school teacher, that even now, freshman girls were sucking off senior boys without getting anything in return. While Stu wanted to last after she had come, it was difficult. If she told him, as he was thrusting after her orgasm, "God, this feels good," he immediately came. If she said nothing, merely looked beatific, he also came. So now, ironically, she suppressed any noises she might have made and often lied to him that she hadn't come in order to keep him at it. And if he got notice that she wanted to make love, he masturbated 10 hours before, because then he definitely lasted longer. In short, for them, making love was like running a war. Plans had to be drawn up, equipment in tip-top condition, troops deployed and coordinated meticulously. There was no room for maverick actions, lest the country end up defeated and at each other's throats. So she called to him now, "Yes, dear, that would be very nice, making love." The next section I'm going to read to you is from the last story in the book, which is called Nothing Human. This is a shorter part I'm going to read. It's a couple who are probably in their 70s on a cruise in Germany. It's a Jewish couple on a cruise in Germany. And 5 a.m., she remains wide awake. His machine breathes obstreperously. This is a CPAP machine. Should she wake him and ask that he take off the mask for a minute? She wants to embrace him. She feels forlorn. In the dark, she clutches at her genitals through her nightgown. They have not made love since they started the cruise a week ago, and she was too rushed and tense the week before getting ready. Not that frequency matters, so long as they care about each other, and making love helps them care about each other. Although, since they started having to schedule it in, it has become a little like brushing and flossing, something almost hygienic, good for you. Yet there is passion in it, too. It erupts right out of the schedule. You do it with regularity to show you are a human being, that you are alive and civilized and can still become ecstatic. You can still do it. You still want to do it. And it is, after all, a sign of love. And the repetition of it, the making of it into a weekly habit, like phoning their children and speaking to the grandchildren. They have an enormous number of grandchildren between them. Those phone calls solidify her, connect her to other human beings, to the human world. On this ever-moving boat on this German river, she receives on her smartphone 12-second videos entitled "Abe Turns Over," "Lucas Reads," "Sarah Takes Bath with New Labradoodle Puppy Named Sherbert." These emails and videos root them, her and her husband, stake them in life, into the rich dirt of it, and the lovemaking grafts them to one another, commingles them despite their having no children together. And besides, after 10 years of doing it, it is a reliable pleasure. It is not as though they met yesterday and are trying to figure out, will this work? He is a permanent part of her life. But it is the daily familiarity with her husband's body she is missing, the handling of his old, knobby flesh. Aged flesh is so fertile, grows excrescences, papules, papillomas, skin tags, moles that have to be checked yearly. Yet the hair thins out, underarm and pubic, as if the soil had changed to one that no longer supports that verdant shrubbery, but instead nourishes an astonishing variety of wild mushrooms. Beautiful, if you have an eye. You want a little more? Okay. This is from the beginning of a story called Night Call. Well, you'll see what this is about because it's the beginning, so I don't have to explain anything. Night Call. The answering service phoned him at 2 o'clock in the morning. A woman named Rose Petrovich, or Petrush, the operator hadn't caught the name exactly, had called. It was an emergency, a death. A death? Who's this message for? I'm Dan Dorenbush, the obstetrician, the gynecologist. In the dark, he ran through a mental list of his patients, all stable. Dan fumbled with his penlight, shook it until the batteries made contact and the minuscule light went on. Beside him, his sleeping wife mumbled something, turned away, drifted to the far side of the bed. Still half asleep himself, he took down the area code, a New Jersey area code and phone number, and hung up. Maybe the caller wanted his father, who was a pediatrician in East Orange. Almost before Dan finished dialing the number, a woman was whispering and sobbing into the telephone. Words and wails and a sputtering sound of S's tumbling over each other like roiling water. He's dead, your father's dead. Who is this? He whispered. What are you talking about? He strained to hear as though there were static on the line. Your father's dead. Sam's dead. Can you come here, please? My son's asleep downstairs. What? Who are you? What is this? It's Rosemary Petrowski, your father's receptionist, his nurse. Sam's dead. Dan had an urge to cry April Fools and laugh uproariously, except it was July. Cut the crap, he wanted to insist, and put my mother on the phone. Although he knew very well that the number he had called was not his parents', he imagined the nurse setting the telephone down on the familiar hall table and walking through his parents' large, dark house to wake his mother. Go on, go get her, he wanted to shout. But he sat in silence, watching the fluorescent second hand slowly sweep around the face of the bedside clock. Minesweeper, he thought, absurdly. Certain, in quotes, reasonable questions bobbled in his mind. What's his pulse, his respirations? Can you get his blood pressure? And then disappeared. Oh, Rosemary, I love you. I'm always dreaming of you. On the other end, the nurse was crying. And then I'll read you the beginning of one last story. The last story, which is the middle story, is called Dancing. And it's the longest story, but I'm going to read about 3-4 pages. The first section, this is told from the point of view of a young man who's 15 or 16, probably 16. Yeah. Dancing, part 1. I am sitting in my first period class, Calculus AB, which I signed up for because I'm lazy. The really genius kids, and there are a lot of them here, take Calc BC, which would have been a shitload of work. But maybe I should have done it because I am sitting in class feeling bored and trying not to look as if I'm staring at the really knockout breasts of Gina Papadopoulos. Her face is lovely too, but if you look at someone's face, they notice faster. or just plain dozing off. The teacher is making diagrams on the board and yada, yada, yadaing, and even though I know it won't be great for getting into college if I don't ace this mother, which I should be able to do with my eyes shut, unfortunately, my eyes are shut. My mom is starting in on me about college these days. Quote, "You're a junior and this year counts and it would be masochistic of you," end quote. She's a psychiatrist, my mom is. You could tell? And maybe she feels she has to keep nagging me, so I don't think she stopped being my mother and become my dad's full-time nurse, which is all right with me, her being his nurse. My father needs her. As I said, I'm sitting in Calc AB, supposedly trying to pay attention, but I have this perverse feeling, what with my dad and all, I just don't give a fuck. It's a beautiful day, clear and warm, and I want to be outside, not looking out at downtown Manhattan or even across at Gina's boobyful boobs. She's very smart and popular and aloof. At least she comes across to me that way. Also a kind person. At Stuyvesant High School, this hot shit public school in New York City that you have to take a test to get into, but the hype is better than the school. Gina started the Big SIB program, seniors looking after freshmen. Anyway, she is looking intently at the board and taking notes while I have put my pencil down. Suddenly, everybody feels the building shake, and the teacher looks at the students for a minute as if they did something, and a couple of kids actually look at each other and roll their eyes, like maybe they went a little too far this time. And then the teacher shrugs his shoulders and tells everyone, pay attention, and goes back to writing quadratic equations on the board. And everyone pays attention because everyone's mother is nagging them, and most kids at Stuyvesant don't need anyone nagging them. I think I actually fall asleep for a few minutes because when I open my eyes and look out the window, I see something that I never saw before. There is an immense fireball 2/3 of the way up the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Red and orange flames bursting out of the building, out of some kind of huge living hole. And I think, what is this? I never saw a big fire up this close before, just a few blocks away. It is startling and horrifying and beautiful, and I want to tell everyone in class to come over to the window and take a look. What could be going on? But I can't get myself to disrupt the class because I want so badly to disrupt the class. Still, I can't stop looking at this humongous fire, and then I hear sirens, which you hear a lot in the city. It's no big deal. But this is one fucking fire, and that building must be full of people, everybody at work. A lot of people are going to get hurt. This is not an art exhibit. Smoke starts across the bright blue sky. Kids are talking in the hall outside, which you don't hear much at Stuyvesant. And now nobody is paying attention to the teacher at all because everyone is staring out the window. And then Mr. Lee, the teacher, this pretty unflappable Asian guy, well, Asian American, is staring out the window too. Good God, he says. One lone man at the bottom of the big hole is waving a white handkerchief. I can't see his face, but I know it's a man. That's how close we are. And I get this nauseated feeling because clearly people are trapped right in front of us and we can't do anything. The teacher yells, "Everyone stay put, I'm going to find out what's happening." And he leaves the room fast. Somebody thinks to turn on the TV, and we all see the World Trade Center on fire on the TV and on fire out the window. And a newscaster says in an awestruck voice that a plane has hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center, and then they show the plane hit the tower. I know it can't be an accident because I have been in the cockpit of a Cessna 172. My dad and I took some lessons when I was 13 before he got sick. It was very cool. And so I know that you don't hit the World Trade Center on a clear day unless you intend to. And I feel frightened and enraged. Meantime, an assistant principal comes on over the loudspeaker and says in a wild voice that a plane has hit the tower and to stay calm. Everyone should go to their next class, and the bell rings to change classes, and nobody moves. And then at the burning building, the man waving the white handkerchief stops waving it. He climbs up across debris to the edge, and he jumps. A few people gasp. Somebody screams. Then there is silence in the room except for the TV. Nobody moves. Everybody is milling around outside in the hall. You can hear them. And one kid in class says, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" and nobody else says anything. I am swallowing and swallowing. New kids start coming into the room, some of them joking and laughing, and one of them is saying, "Can you imagine those sand niggers flying into the World Trade Center?" And another says, "We ought to nuke Mecca." But nobody in Calc AB says anything, and we all get out of the room fast and quiet, as if we committed a crime. So, thank you. And if anyone has a question, a comment, Matthew you want a microphone, Matthew? How are you going to do this? Matthew will walk around.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that. I'm very curious about your writing process. When do you actually build writing into your life with your practice, and whether or not you're part of a writing group?
I'm slovenly, so I don't have regular times and places. I have a room that's supposed to be a writing studio, and I have my office is in my house, and I can work in either one, and I don't have specific times that I do it. I just decide I have to write a story, and then I have to get it done. So I don't have a 40-hour practice. I work probably 20, 25, so I have more time than many people. As for writing groups, I've been in many writing groups, and I quit the last 2 writing groups that I was in over the first story in this book, the story, The Loves of Her Life. In one writing group, most people liked the story, but there was one man who assaulted me. He said that I had an amoral take on this woman. And he told me Alice Munro, no matter what she wrote about, she always had a moral point of view, which is not true. But he was really angry, and he just felt the story was dreadful. So I just felt I couldn't keep writing to that group. And then that same story in another group that I was in at the same time, there were 2 men in that group who disliked Marianne very much. They said she was selfish, and that I needed to rewrite this. She only thought about herself, but the venom was such. I mean, first of all, she's not supposed to be a role model. That's not writing stories. But when you feel people are angry at what you're producing, you just can't stay in that writing group. So now I'm not in any writing group. I have a wonderful editor, Sandra Newman, whom I give credit to in the back. She's also an excellent writer. She's written a lovely book about the literary canon, in which she takes every important piece of literature and boils it down to like 6 lines that are so funny you crack up. She's a wonderful editor, and she got me the agent who was able to sell this book. So when I get done with something, I send it to her, and I feel that she likes what I write and understands what I'm writing, and that I won't get a diatribe.
Hi, Arlene. I'm here because I like the book and the story so much. So in the anecdote you just told, did you wonder why in both groups the ones who seemed to be angry were the men? An obvious question, but I'd appreciate what your response was, especially back then.
I should say there were also men in the group, both groups, who liked it very much. In fact, Francine in the first row, her husband Ralph was in the group. He liked the story immensely. And in that other group where this retired professor socked it to me for being amoral, there was a young man in his early 30s who was getting a master's at Columbia who liked the story very much. So it is true that the three people who raised objections were men. It's hard for me to say. I could make up things, but how would I know, really? I mean, that particular story is told from a woman's point of view, an older woman who is seeing her first husband, her second husband. She's seeing men through her eyes. She's seeing her sexual life, and she's the speaker. And she sees it the way she sees it, which is not veridical. There's no one true way of seeing a thing, after all. And she is concerned with having orgasms and having things the way she wants it, and she feels sadness, and she's critical. So maybe that was when one man said she's selfish. Maybe that's what he was referring to. That man also didn't like black, so he was a big problem. Let me see if I can put down the other two. No, I can't. I mean, people are entitled to their opinions. They certainly are entitled not to like what you've written. But if you're in I was thinking study group, and this is a writing group, but in a study group too, people have to be gentle with you, or you're just crushed, and you can't. I mean, I'm in a study group with Leon Bolter, and if you present a patient there, you present a patient where you're having trouble. It's not worth presenting a patient where everything is going great. You know? So you present a patient where you're having trouble. And if people can see your own personality difficulties intermeshing with the patients, and if they're going to crush you, you can't stay in the study group. The purpose is to help you deal better with your patients. So in a writing group, the purpose has to be to help you write better. And launching an attack is not going to help you write better, at least not most people. There are some few who respond well to attacks, but I happen not to be one of them.
Well, you just said something very interesting, which is in the writing group, too. You're more apt to present something when you're feeling stuck or perplexed. You're not going to present something you're just self-satisfied about. You're going to present something you'd like some help with.
Well, in a writing group, you present everything you're doing, because it's not like you've got 10 stories going, and this one you're having trouble with, so you bring it in. I'm not that productive, but you are bringing things in. You're perfectly right in an early stage, and you want to hear what people say so you can fix it or feel where the trouble is. And if you get such a criticism that it's not fixable, it's like something is terribly wrong, then it becomes very hard to stay in that group. You have another.
Hi, Arlene. I was curious, do you as a psychoanalyst write notes after you, in fact, interview a patient? To what, is there an artist component to that process in terms of how you shape your description of what a patient has said to you?
No, I don't think there's an artist's... I mean, in the first few sessions with the patient, I try to jot down things, because just so that I'll remember how old the patient is, or how many siblings, and what's the age difference. And I have a pad in my lap usually the first couple of times, and I'll ask the person, do you mind if I take a couple of notes? And I take the notes while looking at the patient, so I usually can't read what I've written afterwards at all. A few things are scattered there. And I usually do it for 3 sessions, most 4. So I have something that I have the illusion I can go back to if I need to. And then after that, I count on things being in my head. I hope there are no insurers in the audience. because you're supposed to take notes after each session and measure the patient's this and the well-being and you don't have to do the blood pressure, but all of that. And I think psychoanalysts, myself, certainly are not very neat about that. I also take notes when I start having trouble. If I feel something is going badly, then I know I have to take it to a study group, take it to a consultant, and then I better have down what's going on. So when I get into trouble, I take notes. I think that people who write psychoanalytic papers may be taking many more notes so that you can use them in a paper. So that's my answer to an internist question.
I applauded the fact that you were writing about the sexual lives of older women, and that was unusual, and it was a real contribution to a new literary space. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I like to think so. I like to think this is a real contribution. I didn't intend it in that way. That is, I didn't quite recognize that if I wrote from the point of view of an old or older, whatever you want to call it, woman, that this would fill a hole in the literature of the world. I didn't think that at all. I just thought that's what interests me. That's where I am, and that's what it interests me to write about. So I was quite surprised that the book seemed to attract a lot of attention because of that. And when I read it, Barnes & Noble, the woman who introduced me there, after it was over and everyone was gone, she said to me that she thought I'd struck a blow for women who wanted to have sex and wanted to have orgasms, and she wanted to know, would I sign a book for her mother? And I was so touched by this, because I thought, to strike a blow that doesn't hurt anybody, it's a bloodless coup. I don't know that it's a coup, but I mean, it damaged no one. But if it helped women, that's collateral benefit, I think wonderful. It wasn't my intention. But when you write something, you have certain ideas, and then other people see it so differently. And that's a wonderful thing, that people can connect out of their own lives with what you've written. And so it means different things to everybody. And it's one of the great virtues of getting something out there published. You hear people's reactions, and they move you so much because you didn't think that. And how nice, how lovely. Yes, Muriel. Mm-hmm.
In the people that you write, their conversations are, you just get swept along by them, and their thoughts and insights and all of what is things we have on the day.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, Graciela.
Yes. I wanted to ask you about the first draft, because you mentioned that's difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
For me, and I'm very aware that everything I say is for me, even in those remarks I read, the idea that for the analyst there's redemption. I mean, that's probably something having to do with me. Different analysts must feel very many different things. So for me, a first draft is frightening. You're alone with a computer screen and there's nothing on it, and you put things on it and they're not particularly elegant. You just are kind of spitting it out, and if you want it to be elegant, that it takes you so long to get a sentence out or two sentences out, and you don't know whether you'll keep those sentences in the end or not. I think the main fear, that's really a fear, is that this will be worth nothing. That I will spend all this time sitting here and nothing will come of it. Now, that must have some deep resonance in me, that's what I worry about. But I think that it's close to, it's frequent. I don't know if it's a universal phenomenon that writers have trouble with first drafts. I think it's not uncommon. I keep thinking about whosever line it is that writing is easy. You just sit down at the typewriter and open a vein. And I associate that with first drafts because there's nothing in front of you. It's just you, and you've got to pull stuff out of yourself. And will that be any good? And how will others see it? And how will you see it? And when you reread it, you know, that sinking feeling when you reread something and nothing looks good to you at all. If you can find one paragraph even, it's like you sort of hold on to that paragraph like a piece of wood. If you're in water and you're going down, you hold on to it. So it's that sense that this won't be worth anything, and I'm going to have to look at it and think, oh no. And it's some feeling that I'm no good. That if the thing is no good, I'm no good. It's not a sense of, well, maybe this one's no good, so then the next one will be all right. I was in one writing class once where the teacher told everybody, look, you have to be very careful what you say because the writer is presenting a hunk of herself. And I think that's true. And Phyllis Greenacre has a line about the artist gives her gift with misgivings. Do you worry about how this will be received? And as it's coming out of you for the first time, it's in such a raw shape. And is there anything worth saving there? And there's a lot of time you get up from the screen and you go eat, and you're lucky if it's carrots, you know, as opposed to something that'll put weight on you. People have endless ways of procrastinating so that they don't have to sit down and do that first draft. So I find it, you know, it's long. It goes on. But third drafts and fourth drafts are a pleasure because you have something there. And then you make it more beautiful. You fix this, you move that around, you feel you're home free somehow. You're acceptable. I mean, it sounds almost your mother will accept you. You know, that this is okay. She's not going to tear this down. I suppose these are some of the things I'm thinking as I'm talking to you. What's going on in me that I have those feelings? But so many people have some version of it. I guess everybody has parents and some disapproving part one's taken in oneself and is ready to smash things. Yes. Did you hear that question? Who are your literary parents? Well, who are my literary parents? Chekhov. And Malamud, certainly. I respect Alice Munro very much. I couldn't call her a parent, but I respect her. I guess what I like about Chekhov is his gentleness and his kindness towards his characters. And I think Malamud has the same characteristic. Trying to think if I can think of, I mean, I love Dostoevsky. I do love Dostoevsky. I mean, The Brothers Karamazov, I think it's the best novel in the world. I mean, there's all that life and forcefulness and question in the back. You want to? Who has the microphone? I think in those comments, which were mine, I did write them, I was trying to find something similar. in writing fiction and being an analyst. And so I came up with the idea that you have to tell the truth, a truth, you know, in both endeavors. But there are different ways of telling the truth. I mean, in a piece of fiction, you can be quite jolting. You don't get paid as much, for one thing, for writing fiction. And if you lose some readers, it doesn't matter. But when you have a live human being in front of you, you have to think, how is this going to hit this person? And it's not because they're paying you money. I'm being crude and funny. But it's that you care. You want the person to be able to absorb what you're saying. And if you hit them on the head, they'll leave. And I have had at least one instance, I felt that I said something that was true, but I said it much too soon because I misjudged the patient's ability to absorb it. And I lost the patient, and I felt very bad about that because I thought I could tell her she was behaving like her mother, and that would be something you could tell a person. But it was too soon, and the patient was too fragile, and she told me, I pass. I look like I'm normal, but I'm not. And you're using analysis like a blood sport. Now, you feel quite terrible about that, and it is a narcissistic attack. She had felt attacked by my little comment, and she really shot it to me. You know, in some instances, you get reactions to things that's not necessarily that you said it badly or that you said it too soon. So it's in a certain way, you have more freedom writing. You don't know who exactly is going to be reading this, and you do worry your sons will read it, but my sons won't. So you have to worry about your relatives. They will look at this, and you'll lose your whole family. So that's the worry in writing. But with a patient, it's a live human being in front of you who's suffering, and you don't want to assault the patient, but you have to tell them something worthwhile. So you have to feel your way along. And fortunately, one is usually in the dark. You don't know that much, so you can't do that much damage too early. You really, once in a rare while, you know something and say something that you shouldn't have said. I don't know if that answers the question. I hadn't thought of writing a long paper on ways to deliver interpretations, but I think for all of us, it's an issue, how to get across something that you see and get it across in a kind way, but a straightforward way. Okay. Please, Carol. Do you remember that paper of Freud's, or if somebody could tell me, because I read it long ago and I can't call it to mind. So I would end up having just to talk about my own daydreaming, but I wish I knew the paper. Leon, you probably know the paper. Mm-hmm. Well, I have a house littered with little pieces of paper with story ideas, because when something just comes to my mind, I think, oh, I should use that. I should put that down somewhere. So, it just comes, and you just write that. And most of the stuff you don't use, and also I can't read my writing, so if I look at it 8 months later, I have no idea what it is. So that gets rid of a lot of it. But that, I will start. Things come. Something hits you, or something somebody says hits you, and it reverberates and starts a whole thing. So you put that down. And then later when you sit down to do something with it, I tend to take notes before I start because I'm so scared of the first draft that if I get some notes down there, I feel that I have something I could show to myself. And then you accrete stuff. But constantly, things just rise. And I think they rise the way listening to a patient, as you say, a novel will come to your mind. Or something your own mother did comes to your mind as you're listening to somebody talking about her, a parent. And this stuff rises up, and you use it in treatment because you understood you felt this, and now you can understand what the patient felt. So so when I do daydream, I think it's important. I'm not so disciplined, but I think in the lying about, I write down my dreams. I like to just have some time where nothing's going on, and that's when things are going on, I guess, when nothing's going on. Things occur to one. Yeah. I'll read that paper when I go home. Oh, please. Could you all hear that question? Yeah. Yes, I think that is, it might be overstated what Bellow said, that if you know a person's favorite joke, you know everything about him. Otherwise, we analysts, what we do, a patient walks in, you say, please tell me your favorite joke. None of us does that. But you do come to realize in the course of a treatment that a patient who tells you jokes tends to tell you the same kind of jokes all the time. And I have a dentist, and I go to him, and he always tells me a joke, and it's always a misogynistic joke. I don't know why he comes in and tells it to me, but that's what he tells me. So if you want to know a favorite joke of mine, they're all jokes that I heard from Bernard Malamud. Those are the ones that have stayed with me. And one of the jokes I use in the story Night Call, and I give it to a character. Now, I don't know what this will say about me that No, I can't tell that joke. Let me see if I can tell another one. Now, if you read it now, why is it that I can write it in this book, and standing in front of you, I can't tell you this joke? I've written it down. Well, he doesn't tell it very well, the way it's told there. Oh, Jesus. Look, there is an inhibiting factor. It's as if one is going to be a bad girl. Let me try. All right, I'll try. Let's see if I can get this joke out. So, in the Third Reich, there was a need to produce strong, healthy German boys to be soldiers, and they started schools of copulation in many towns. And in one town, they ran up to the first graduation. It was just a year-long course. And in the middle of the Platz, somebody has to help me with the German, the square, they were holding the graduation exercises, and the little Herr professor came out and said, this is the first class from the School of Copulation, and we are very proud to honor here 3 students, the best students. They're all women, by the way, the students. So it's a strange joke for me to be telling. Okay, so the first student comes up and gives it the bronze medal, and her professor says, now, would you tell us loud and clear, who would you like for the father of your first child? And she says, Rommel. So everybody applauds. Rommel, the desert fox. This is wonderful. Then comes the next student who gets the silver award. And who would you like for the father of your first child? And she says, Goring, Herr Goring. Oh, wild applause all over the plots. Okay. Then comes up the first prize winner, the big prize winner, Ilse Buchmeister. So funny, I'm hearing this joke, from all these male points of view that I heard it from. A very buxom young woman comes up, blonde, blue-eyed, and she stands next to her professor who says, Ilse Buchmeister, we're very proud to give you the gold medal from the School of Copulation. You're the best fucking student in the whole school. And now, would you tell us loud and clear, who would you like for the father of your first child? And she says, loud and clear, Winston Churchill. And it gets dead quiet all over the place, okay? And the SS are coming around, guns and all kinds of stuff. And the Herr Professor says, Ilse, there must be some mistake. You said Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill is the foremost enemy of the Reich. And Ilse Bruckmeister says, well, I was listening by mistake. There's a broadcast of the BBC. And I heard him, this man, Winston Churchill, and he said, it will be long and it will be hard. We will do it on the rooftops. We will do it on the beachheads. And once we get in, we will never, never withdraw. When I think about this joke, it's such a male-identified joke. The whole joke is like, where am I telling this from? And I don't know that most women want it to be long and hard and never, ever to be over. I'm not so sure that's the best thing. But I like the joke. I like the joke. There's a kind of, there's a Jewish quality to it. I'll tell you one more joke that I got from the same source, which is a little gentler, which is that a nobleman comes to the tailor in the ghetto with beautiful brocade material and wants a suit made. And he knows this is the best tailor around. So the tailor says, sure, I can make your suit. He takes his measurements and he says, if you come back in 6 weeks, I'll have it made. So the nobleman comes in 6 weeks and the tailor apologizes. He says, the suit's not ready. And he shows him, he's done some of it, but it's not ready. And the nobleman is very huffy and the tailor says, come back in 6 weeks, for sure I'll have it done. Nobleman comes back in another 6 weeks. It's still not made. And this takes 6 more weeks. And finally it is made. And the nobleman is really furious. He tries on the suit and he says, it's very beautiful, but he says, God made the whole world in 6 days. And it took you 6 weeks and 6 weeks and another 6 weeks. And the tailor says to him, but look at the world. And then look at this beautiful suit. Any other questions? Okay. Matthew, you said I should yawn at the point when I was ready to stop. Thank you all. Lovely audience, lovely audience. Thank you. I'll be happy.